What do you think happens with male cows who don't produce milk in dairy industry? Slaughterhouse. What do you think happens with male chickens in egg industry? Slaughterhouse. What do you think happens to chickens when they're no longer profitable? Slaughterhouse. When it comes to consuming animal products, it's not a necessity for our survival. We literally went on a war to defend slavery. That's how much we wanted to keep our traditions. We need the right amount of people who are active and who are outspoken. The entire US wasn't against slavery in order to pass that phase. We don't need the entire population to go vegan, but we need everyone that we can, everyone who is ready to change. I have a lot of experience working with pandemics, including COVID and influenza, and just knowing how animal agriculture and consumption of animals is a leading cause of so many of these problems. We have strong evidence showing that animal agriculture and consumption of animal products is the leading cause of many global issues, including global malnutrition and world hunger, antibiotic resistance.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode. Today, I'm joined with Dr. Faraz Harsini for a topic that I do not think is discussed enough, animal rights. Dr. Faraz Harsini originally studied chemical engineering. He then did a master's in biotech and cancer research before finishing with a Ph.D. in cellular physiology and molecular biophysics. And now Dr. Faraz is in animal rights. He's the founder and CEO of Allied Scholars for Animal Protection. That's ASAP. It's a non-profit that helps students advocate for human and non-human animals in the most sustainable and effective manner. Faraz is very good at multitasking and having lots of projects at the same time. He's also a bioprocessing senior scientist at the Good Food Institute, focusing on technical and scientific challenges facing the scaling up of cultivated meat, so meat made from cells. Faraz, hopefully I got most of that correct. It was a bit of a mouthful, so you can correct me if I said anything wrong. Then tell me, how did you go from chemical engineering to animal rights?
No, I think you got it pretty right. But yeah, so I guess I was always interested in chemistry and mathematics, and one of my high school teachers basically encouraged me to do chemical engineering. And I remember I was also very much concerned about the environment. So I thought that would be something helpful. But during my undergrad, the oil spill during Gulf of Mexico incident happened. So I was exposed to a lot of damage caused by oil industries. And after seeing that, I was like, I can't be doing this. What is a better thing I can do? So I actually switched my research to biofuel production. Around that time when I was in college, just because I'm also a musician, I got involved in some charity work. So we went to adults and started playing music for children suffering from cancer. And sometimes it was very emotional because they were terminally ill. We would, bond with them, and, next time we go there and they're not there. So I started asking myself, what is a better thing that I can do with my life? And the answer was like, answering the root cause. I'm that kind of a person that I really want to just have a solution for the root cause rather than just addressing the symptoms. So that's why I applied abroad, came to a really good cancer center and studied neuroblastoma, which is a cancer in children, and then ended up doing my PhD on studying proteins and how they're involved in different types of diseases. And then after my PhD, again, I asked myself, what's the best thing I can do? And despite the fact that I had some good offers for postdoc, I joined pharmaceutical companies because I really wanted to accelerate clinical research. So getting therapeutics out there as fast as possible for infectious diseases, for cancer and inflammatory diseases. And, again, I guess the interesting part was anytime in my life I was interested in anything that had to do with either the environment or health, it came back to one thing, and that was like animal consumption. And throughout this time, I was also exposed to atrocities behind the scenes of industries that abuse animals, which I never knew about, especially egg and dairy. And so that just opened a whole nother world that I just didn't know about. And so at every time in my life, I ask myself, what is the most impactful thing that I can do that impacts the most number of people, the most number of animals, and the environment? And to me, doing vegan advocacy was that triple point where it covered the environment, health, and also animals. And because of that, I always say, mathematically, rationally, statistically, ethically, show me something that is as impactful as this, and I will quit what I do today and I will go do that. But I'm not convinced that there is something as impactful. And so after the pharmaceutical company job, I really wanted to dedicate my life full time to, advocating for a plant-based diet and veganism for all three aspects. And yeah, that's why I took the job at GFI. And I also want to train other students to do effective advocacy, to choose their careers according to this, and have very impactful futures.
You're originally from Iran.
That is correct, yeah.
You didn't explain, how did you go vegan? Was it a sudden change you made overnight?
Yeah, I wish it was an overnight thing, but I think the reason that it wasn't is because no one came to me and said, hey, wake up, look at this. I think if someone did that, I would have changed immediately, but the person who was doing this, woke me up, I guess. She herself was vegetarian, and I respect her so much because that really opened my eyes to the entire thing. But at the same time, I wish somebody really held me accountable and was a little more strict. However, I'm still very grateful. So yeah, I never heard about even veganism. It's not, I guess at the time it wasn't even a word in Iran in Farsi. I never heard people not consuming animal products altogether. I had heard of vegetarianism, but that was just like a, hippie thing that some people who were super into health did for a little bit before they gave up and they ate weird food, and it had no connection with, animal rights or ethics or even the environment. I knew none of that. So yeah, I was about 22 years old when I left Iran, and I was living in Germany for a while, and my roommate said, funny enough, I cared about animals so much. I actually asked for her help to design a poster that encouraged Iranians not to buy goldfish during Persian New Year. And she told me that, hey, Faraz, you're trying to save these goldfish, but you literally sit at a table and eat fish. You say that you love animals and you eat them, and that just doesn't work. And I can't help you because you're a hypocrite. Didn't say that word, but that's basically what she implied. And I was mad at her. I was like, wow, how dare you challenging my morality? And I thought I was a very good person. I was involved in a lot of human rights activities back in Iran. And yeah, but it woke me up, it took me, she never said anything else. She didn't say, hey, watch this documentary, here is all the reason that you need to go vegan. None of that. So it took me, it was very organic, kind of like how you said, it took me 3 months. And I remember during this 3 months, I just justified. I said, it's just 1 second of animals dying. So sorry, animals, I love meat so much. I can never go without meat. And I just justified it.
People are sort of looking for reasons to not go vegan. That's sort of what I was doing as well in my head. I was more focusing on the health side of things. I was trying to find a nutrient which is missing. Then I came across great plant-based doctors such as Dr. Matthew Nagra, who sort of one by one, he debunked all of my arguments. And there's Lifting Vegan Logic. Once all my arguments were sort of debunked, from crop deaths to health, realized there's no real reason not to go vegan.
Absolutely.
You said in Farsi, there's no real word for veganism. Maybe there is now.
Yeah.
Is there one? Now there is. Why is animal welfare important?
Well, first of all, I feel like that's the first step that we can take to not be a hypocrite. And I mean that genuinely. I think when we show what happens to animals, most of us feel pretty terrible. Whether we justify it, whether we think that we should be eating them or not, nobody likes to hurt animals. I feel like the only people that enjoy hurting animals would be psychopaths. But most of us would care about animals, at least certain animals in our lives, especially companion animals. And it's just that it's kind of the society kind of betrays us and makes it so normal that we can't see that we love certain types of animals and we completely are ignorant to the suffering of the rest. And I consider myself a very logical person, but whether you're logical or emotional, you can see that there is a huge disconnect, the cognitive dissonance between how we are looking at different types of animals without any rational reason. And because of that, I think it's probably one of the best things that an individual can do for aligning their actions and their values for, that's the first benefit, and not being a part of this broken system and be a part of solution rather than being a part of the problem. And of course, when you think about the environmental impact, it's no difference than littering or any other things that are just bad for the environment. If I had an exhaust in my house that released a ton of smoke in the air that impacted you, we can all agree that this is not really a personal choice. I mean, it's a personal choice in a way that anything that we do, it's a personal choice, but it's affecting other people. So, we have strong evidence showing that animal agriculture and consumption of animal products is the leading cause of many global issues, including global malnutrition and world hunger, antibiotic resistance. So that's something that I always worked on. I have a lot of experience working with pandemics, including COVID and influenza. And just like knowing how animal agriculture and consumption of animals is a leading cause of so many of these problems. And I feel like every time that we consume animal products, we become more and more responsible for these events. So clearly that's why it's so important for individuals to take this step as the first one. But why animal ethics is so important, I would say it's also because it's a moral urgency. The reason it's a moral urgency is that if you go to streets and ask people, do you think a black and white people, do they suffer the same if I stab them? Do they have the basic rights to be alive? I think most people in modern societies would agree that, yes, of course. What are you talking about? If you say, do you think a gay person and a straight person suffer the same? Regardless of their ideas of gay marriage, they would say, yeah, of course they suffer the same. But here we are having this debate sometimes where animals like dogs and cows can feel pain more than plants. That's how society is looking at animals that are anatomically so similar to us. So because of that, it's so neglected. It's rooted in our traditions, cultures, religion, and people use literally any reason to justify harming them. And because of that, it's a moral urgency. And because of that, I think it's more important for us to focus on it. And lastly, I say that it also interconnects with different types of human rights, because the ways that we oppress other humans is by focusing on our differences. So human rights doesn't mean that, we are identical. I mean, of course we are not. I have Persian accent, you have British accent, I'm gay. I don't know about, I'm kind of brown, you're white. We have clear differences. But what we recognize is that despite our differences, we have the same basic needs. And if you stab me, it hurts. And if I stab you, you'll be hurt. And so instead of focusing on our differences, we focus on our similarities. And that's the basis of human rights. And in fact, anytime in the history of humanity that we focus on our differences, that's how we justified oppressing and killing and mass murdering people, just by saying that, they have a different religion, they look different. But today we know that none of that is morally relevant. And that is why exploitation of animals because of who they are is also wrong for the same reason. Because animal rights doesn't mean that a cow is identical to a person, or you don't have to really think or believe that a mouse or a dog is identical to you. You don't think your dog is, worth as much as you or your family member, but all you realize is that if you step on their foot and they yelp, you feel terrible and you don't want them to suffer. So animal rights means that, yes, of course we are different. We have different physiology. Maybe humans are smarter, but dogs can smell better. They can hear better. Of course we are different. But in all the ways that it matters, we are very similar. If you stab me, it hurts. If you stab a dog, it hurts. If you stab a cow, it hurts. If you stab a chicken, it hurts. If you stab a fish, it hurts. So again, I think we should just focus on our similarities. And once we get distracted and focus on our differences by saying that animals are not as smart, animals are, they don't feel pain as much, or things that just we say to each other to justify that. Once we focus on that, that's, I think, the root cause of any kind of oppression, focusing on our differences. So in a way, I think focusing on animal rights is important, because as long as we are doing this to them, we use the same justification to oppress each other.
I agree. It's not a good idea to compare intelligence, because you have some humans who can, even in certain cases, be less intelligent than animals. And no human in the world would say we should kill this person for meat just because they're less intelligent than a dog, for example, maybe someone who's had a brain injury.
Absolutely. I think a really good question for people to have and ask themselves is, because every time that we make a comparison between other non-human animals to humans, they're like, yeah, you can't make that comparison because we are humans. I'm like, okay, how are we different that matters? And they say things like, oh, we are smarter, or we have soul, or whatever. But the best question to ask yourself is, what quality other animals don't have that if a human didn't have, you would treat that person like those animals? So if you say it's okay to treat animals that way and kill them and murder them or whatever because they're less intelligent, then if there is a person who's less intelligent with Down syndrome or whatever, does that give us the right to go and just kill them and murder them? What about a person, think about it, a person who's in coma forever, we treat those better than the way that we treat animals. Like a person who can't feel pain, who's not even conscious, we still give them more rights than conscious, sentient animals. So what quality non-human animals don't have that if a human didn't have, we would treat them like those animals?
People, I believe, are fundamentally disconnected from what is on their plate. Even the ancestral crowd, the paleo crowd, who are saying you should be eating meat every day, every meal. I'm pretty certain if I gave them a weapon, the majority of them would not be able to kill the animal that they want to eat. So it's a disconnect. And have you seen the industry sort of propagating this disconnect, so hiding their practices? Is this something they do, or is it quite easy to see what's going on inside a factory farm?
I mean, in the US, we have ag-gag laws in some states that forbids people like whistleblowers to show the real face. And of course, it's very difficult. We only have undercover investigations to show us the real face of these industries. And of course, any kind of animal products that you buy, be it egg, milk, meat, it's always a cartoonish picture of like a pig, a cow. They're always smiling. They're always, happy animals. That's how they frame them. But I don't think you need me to tell you that no animal is ever happy when they're hanged upside down, when they're on the line to be slaughtered, and members of their own species are being slaughtered in front of them, the smell of blood and everything. No one can be happy in such an environment. So yes, of course, they hide it from us, and that's why they've been so successful, in my opinion.
There are a few good documentaries out there. Even if you raise a cow in what someone could think humane condition, there's no way of killing the cow without it feeling pain, because it's extremely traumatic.
Absolutely. I think pain is not really a relevant factor. Of course, killing someone without causing pain or with less pain would be preferable than torturing them. But I don't think morally it weighs that much. Just think about it. If I killed a person and I went to the court, and in the court in my defense, I said, hey, yeah, I just banged their head from the back and they didn't even see it coming. They didn't suffer. So think about it. If I murder someone immediately versus, or drug them first so they didn't even suffer, they just went to sleep, then I killed them, versus, I tortured them and then killed them. Of course, the former is better, but the court is not going to let me go just because they didn't suffer, because I still took somebody's bodily autonomy. And, this person had a life that meant something to them. I took their freedom. I took their life. They had families. They had communities. So even if it was possible to do that without pain, that still doesn't justify taking somebody's life. Because if you can't do that in humans, if you think that's morally wrong, why do you think it suddenly becomes okay when it's members of other species? And I do want to touch base on what you mentioned about humane. That humane, I just ask people when they say humane, define humane. Look it up on Google right now. Humane means act of compassion. So an example of killing an animal compassionately is when a dog is sick and old, and you put them down in the nicest conditions. You take them to vets. You pay so much money to make sure that their last breath is in arms of love and compassion. And you do that despite the fact that it's a hard decision and you're crying, but you do that because of the animal, because you're trying to reduce suffering. So that's an act of compassion. That's an example of humane killing. But when it comes to consuming animal products, given the fact that we don't need it, so it's not a necessity for our survival, we do that just because of the convenience and the taste and pleasure that we get from doing that. And because of that, it's just a selfish act. And because of that, it can never be humane. It's just like saying like anything else that is morally wrong, such as murdering a person or raping a person, and just say that I did that like humanely. When something is inherently wrong, it can't be done humanely. And the reason that I say inherently wrong is because we don't need to consume animal products. If we needed to, it would have been a different story. I would be 100% be here and advocate a more gentle way to kill animals because we have to eat them. But we don't, and therefore it's fundamentally unethical for us.
For people listening, they should know that the whole of society is trying to dissuade them from going vegan. I've heard a lot of very clever people with extremely high education, such as Sam Harris, say putting something into existence, giving it a good life, and then killing it at the end is better than it never having been in existence at all.
So I think there's an interesting ethical wrinkle with respect to the prospect of farming in such a way that the lives of farm animals are net positive, right? So that it's better to have existed as a cow than to have not existed at all. And if we had some sense that these are indeed happy cows, well, then it would be better to raise them and treat them well and then finally eat them than it would be to not have done any of that and manage to just engineer tofu that is so healthy that we can live off of it.
So how would you answer someone that says something like this?
Yeah, I guess would we justify that with humans? And, would that be okay to bring a human to this life just to give them, or how would you feel, I guess, if the sole purpose of your existence was like your slaughtering day, your murdering day was already determined before you were born, and your whole purpose in life was for someone else to exploit you. And, when I said, do we do that with other humans? I guess if your first reaction is that, oh, you can't do the comparison with humans, again, I invite you to what I just said. Why can't we? What quality these animals lack that makes them so not worthy of our consideration, moral consideration, right? And I fully agree with you. A lot of smart people, so I think like intelligence really doesn't compensate for cognitive dissonance. And intelligent people can come up with ways and justifications that sound smart, but they're just flawed. And Sam Harris does that. Neil deGrasse Tyson, as a scientist that I always respected, he compared like animals with plants. And you see that even some of the good scientists use the same, one of the 5 or 10 common excuses against veganism, as if they've just never heard the other side of argument.
Changing habits requires a lot of energy, and it's easy just to come up with a reason. So back to that example, just to visualize, would it be okay to do it with humans? Even if they were driving a Ferrari every day, you gave them a mansion, you already determined their date. when they're going to die? Of course not. Would you do it with humans? For a long time, I thought that vegetarian and veganism was on the same ethical position because it doesn't require the direct killing. Looking into this, I now know this is not true. Could you briefly explain why is vegetarianism a diet and not an ethical position like veganism?
I think excluding meat certainly is one step to take to reduce animal suffering, but I think the assumption here is that egg and dairy are any difference than meat industry. They are just extension of meat industry. I would even argue that animals raised for meat, they are killed once, but animals used for egg and dairy, they suffer tremendously. So, for instance, cows in dairy farms, they have to be artificially impregnated multiple times. Every time they have to give birth, and their babies are taken away. And I always ask, what do you think happens to cows after they're no longer profitable? What do you think happens to chickens when they're no longer profitable, when they don't lay as many eggs as they literally die of exhaustion, or they're sent to slaughterhouse after a long time of suffering? And what do you think happens with male cows who don't produce milk in dairy industry? Slaughterhouse. What do you think happens with male chickens in egg industry? Of course, they get rid of them, right? And then you have, debeaking, detawing, because they just keep these birds in such horrible environments. And that's also the case in local farms. What do you think local farms do with their animals when they are no longer profitable? Because it's a business. So the moment that these animals are not profitable, no one's going to send them to nursing homes, and they're not going to live off of their social security. They're going to go to slaughterhouse. And that's why dairy and egg are very harmful for animals. And for us, there is literally no reason to consume that. It's actually pretty weird when you think about it, except that we are conditioned to consume these products. And of course, there's tons of lobbying going on to make people believe that they need these animal products to get strong bones. But when you really think about it, we are the only species who's convinced that they must drink milk of another species as adults. And apparently the fact that 70% of world population loses lactase to digest lactose is not a good enough of a reason to show that we are not supposed to have milk as adults. We all digest that as babies because we need that. But as adults, we literally lose that ability because we're not supposed to have milk. And that's 70% of populations, except white people, of course, because of the mutations they have. In fact, they kept doing it so much until they mutated this gene. But if that's not the reason that we're not supposed to have milk, I don't know what is.
What about if someone has their own chickens? What is your view on this?
It's the same idea that we are still exploiting animals for business. My first question is, why are you insisting on having eggs to begin with when you have so many better options? Are you literally just missing a big shot of cholesterol? So why are you insisting to do that to begin with? But second, again, going back to what I was saying, even in backyard farms, they still buy the hens from places where you are rest assured that male chickens were murdered after birth. So there is, as long as we are abusing animals, the industry thrives. And of course, we are not able to produce that much egg in backyard situation for the entire world. So you either have the audacity or the privilege to buy these eggs from these farms, but what about other people? So other people who can't afford it, should they just go and contribute to a violent system? So it's not sustainable for the entire world to have egg from backyard chicken. And remember, every time that you consume this, you're signaling to the entire society that this is something okay. And remember that my grandma had chickens. Things that we did to these chickens, even in a backyard situation, at the time wasn't weird, but now I think about it. Every time I had to remove the egg and just lift the hen, the eggs weren't fertilized, but the thing is, hens don't know that the egg is not fertilized. It's not a terminated pregnancy. It's not equivalent to period in humans. So they care for their eggs a lot of times. And so us pushing them away and removing the egg, it clearly agitated the hens. They didn't like it. So why are we going out of our way to exploit animals, to take away their, it's their egg? Why do we think we have the right to take away something that is theirs? But of course, there's a huge marketing in this to make people believe that, yeah, there is a nice way to exploit animals, which there isn't. And also, you see that there is a lot of marketing labeling, like free range, locally raised. And I say two things to that. First of all, a lot of people say these things to themselves, that there is a nice way as they're consuming, you go to a restaurant, you are not asking where the egg is coming from, right? So are you using these hypothetical situations to justify what you're consuming right now? So that's one thing. Second, if you go to CDC and look at the statistics for bird flu, this year we broke a record in the US and globally. And the number of birds died. As of yesterday, it was 58 million birds that died from bird flu. And if you go to CDC, you see that it's both backyard and factory farming birds. So they both contribute to zoonotic diseases. So how about that? Like, you're still contributing to pandemics. Again, going back to my question, why do we think that we need this egg that harms the animals, harms the environment? It's a public health threat. What is a good justification for that?
Something else I wanted to mention is that chickens, they can also sometimes eat their own egg to recalcify. So it's up to them to do what they want with it if you have a better alternative. Because we here in Europe, we're not in a survival situation compared to other people who in Africa or in areas which do not have the options currently, but it will be available to them. For them, maybe an egg can be nutritious because they have no other options. But I've read that the world, it can provide for more than 10 billion people in terms of a plant-based diet. So in the future, I think what we really need to do is just improve the distribution of all the resources if we're going to get to a completely plant-based world.
Absolutely.
The next topic I wanted to talk about is animal testing. What is the problem with animal testing? How much pain do animals feel when they're put under testing?
That's actually a very good question, because I think when people are defending animal testing, they don't have a clear idea of how it's done. I don't know what they imagine, but just think about yourself just being sick from like flu or just some common cold, and how miserable you are and how you just want it to end immediately. These animals are continuously either burnt or infected with infectious diseases. So from the moment they are born, they're living in a state of like terrible, feeling terribly sick, or they're given big tumors, like the tumor is like half the size of a mouse. And so they're without painkillers, right? So their entire time they're suffering. Of course, there is wound healing studies where they burn their skin, they pour stuff to their eyes. And another thing is we consistently take bloods and samples from them without anesthetics or any of. So think about it. Why do children are so afraid of needles? Because it's not because of the pain necessarily. It's also because they don't know what's happening to them. So for animals, when you grab a mouse, they don't know what's happening. They don't know that you're not about to kill them. Just imagine if another species, 100 times, 200, 1,000 times your body weight just like grabbed you and poked you with a needle, you will be freaking out, right? So the amount of pain, like psychological pain and all of that, it's beyond our comprehension. How much animals suffer in every single lab. So that's the reality of it. And to me, the first red flag was when I was taking a bioethics class and they were preparing us to go to the animal facility, and they said no videotaping or photography. And I said, why is that? They said, well, people get emotional if they see the real face. And I said, well, we support that with our tax money. So isn't it their right to know what's happening with their tax money? And, he just changed the topic and said, we can discuss later. But just like meat, egg, dairy industries, there are brochures for selecting like animal models in the lab, in biomedical labs. And you go page by page, and it's always pictures of a cute mouse sitting on a test tube, or just like a scientist is like cuddling a monkey, or like a mouse. Is always that image. But if you actually do it, if you be in meetings where they show what they do to animals. And these are good places. People that actually claim that they care about these animals, it's horrible. It's beyond imagination.
What is the alternative to animal testing?
Well, we have a lot of alternatives. Obviously, there is in vitro, meaning that testing in test tubes. But it's not just as simple as test tubes. It's a lot of cell culture that you can develop from any kind of cells. And it can be human relevant, so you can take human cells and test it on. So it's called in vitro. Then you have computer models. The benefit of computer models is that you can use the power of AI and machine learning. You have human cadavers. You can have, with computer models, you can actually do so much that you just can't do you can't do with animals in a very short amount of time with pretty much no money spent. There's something called phase 0 of clinical trials. So that's when you do microdosing in human volunteers. So if there is going to be any side effects, you catch before it actually hurts people. So you monitor them. So it's called phase 0 clinical trials. You have human volunteers who are terminally ill and no other drug works on them. So by not allowing these volunteers to voluntarily take this medication that just developed in a lab and we tested and we are pretty sure that it's going to work, to not let them take it and take it through animal testing, which is going to take 4 or 5 years. And by then these people just don't have that much time. So you're taking away the right that way. So that's one thing. So you have human volunteers. There is organs on chips. These actually can be multiple organs. So you can actually mimic having lung, kidneys, heart, all on a chip. You can have organoids. So these are actually 3D organs. It can be brain, it can be lungs. So if you want to test Alzheimer's or test lungs, we can actually have organoids. So that's another thing.
Sounds like there are a lot of solutions we can pursue to this terrible animal testing. A lot of times what they find in rats doesn't pan out in humans anyway. For example, there's this substance called acrylamide in burnt potatoes. They found in rats it's toxic, and for a long time they thought it was also toxic in humans. And then they did the epidemiological studies in humans and they found that there's actually no correlation. Drinking coffee, in fact, reduces risk of cancer. So the fact that there's such a big discrepancy also between when you do trials on rats, the results and the results in humans means that I think these models that you mentioned are better, such as the computer models, machine learning, organs on the chips.
Yeah, computer models in some cases have been shown to be predicting better than animal testing, which is not surprising at all. And remember that animal testing will never get better, but computer models are getting infinitely better forever. So the potential to grow in alternatives to animal testing is infinite versus animal testing that always reaches its limit. And you always have external validity problems. So every time that you get the data from animal testing and you want to take it to human population, we're going to run into external validity issue, meaning that the results are not applicable to another population. And that is completely expected just because we have different anatomy, we have different physiology, immunology, and biochemistry. Like you mentioned, I always say, just imagine if we tested chocolate on dogs or other mammals to assess the safety of chocolate in humans. We would have labeled chocolate as absolutely poisonous for humans. And it's exactly because of that animal testing is holding science back, because it's causing a lot of false positive and false negative data, which can, in fact, not only it holds science back and delays development of therapeutics, but also it kills the possibility of having drugs that would work in humans if we didn't test on animal testing, if we didn't test it on animals and didn't get false positive results. And vice versa. It can actually work in animals and we show that it's 100% safe. We take it to humans and it fails. A very good example of that is a clinical trial that actually happened in the UK, TGN 1412. It's also called the Elephant Man clinical trial. So this was a drug that they tested in monkeys and they showed it was 100% safe in 500 times higher dose that they would ever test in humans. So 500 times more dosage, they showed that it's safe in monkeys. Then they came to phase 1 clinical trials, which is a handful of healthy volunteers. And everyone who got the actual drug versus placebo, they had immediately, within minutes, they started having major organ failures and so much inflammation and cytokine storm that they had to amputate their fingers. And yeah, one of them was so inflamed that looked like an elephant. That's why it's called Elephant Man clinical trial. And the target of this drug was almost identical, actually virtually identical in monkeys and humans. But because there is still so many differences in physiology of humans versus even our closest ancestors, our closest relatives, such as other primates, there's like so many differences that drugs just do with us differently. So because of that, we keep getting false positive and false negative. And if you don't care about animals, you still should be against animal testing because it's hurting patients as well.
I saw on your YouTube channel that you were giving a speech on animal testing.
It's a high-risk, low-return investment from a scientific perspective. High-risk, low-return. First, it's a threat to our public safety. Remember when Texas Biomed almost started a pandemic, when primates escaped their facility in 2012 and again in 2018? Well, what would happen next time when a primate infected with a contagious and deadly virus comes in contact with a San Antonio resident, with you, with your children? Statistically, it's only a matter of time, and in fact, the USDA has fined Texas Biomed for 3 violations of the Animal Welfare Act.
Correct. It was a biomedical company, Texas Biomed, that was trying to use people's tax money dedicated for small businesses who suffered from COVID. And this was a large pharmaceutical company that actually made profit off of COVID. And they wanted to expand their animal research facility. And so we were testifying to basically say the same thing, that, it's unnecessary. They have alternatives. And funny enough, they argued that, no, it's absolutely mandated by FDA. It's no longer is mandated. So we have the FDA Modernization Act just approved last December. So it's no longer mandatory. And funny enough, the head of Primate Center there was investigation showing that they fabricated data, fabricated grants. And guess what? They still got their money. So despite all of that, all the public and everything. So they have the power, of course. They spoke to the mayor behind the scenes. It was very clear, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't fight.
Well, credit to you for keeping up the fight. Have you ever got any negative reactions to the fight that you're doing and for all the campaigning for animal welfare?
It would be weird if we didn't. Of course, so every time that you're challenging the status quo, people are going to fight back. And a prime example of that is like something as obvious as slavery for us, that like how wrong we could be. In the US, we literally went on a war to defend slavery, right? Because that's how much we wanted to, keep our traditions or whatever we used to do. So we resist. It's almost like laws of physics, like resistance to change. So yeah, of course, every time we challenge something that is the norm of society, that is accepted as status quo, you get resistance, which is even another reason that why it's so important for us to not be quiet and use any opportunity to really bring awareness. Because there are people like us who grow up in the same culture, they don't know anything, and a lot of us resisted as well, You had a hiccup with nutrition, to me taste was so big that it was like, there's no way I quit this. A couple of years later, now I can't even believe that I was like looking at animals like that just like 10 years ago. So yeah, we have to keep up the fight and, bring awareness and hope that we can just change the society. And just like, other forms of social justice movement, we don't need the entire world to go vegan. We need the right amount of people who are active and who are outspoken. The entire US wasn't against slavery in order to past that phase, right? So we don't need the entire population to go vegan, but we need everyone that we can, everyone who's ready to change.
The overall goal is that even that people who don't want to go vegan, they'll eventually be just gently pushed in that direction through cultured meat, and they won't even know.
Yeah.
You talked about slavery. Sometimes I've got a negative reaction from comparing animal rights violations as the Holocaust. Is this a correct criticism I got, in your view, to compare this as a Holocaust on animals?
I think it's more like a distraction that people try to say that, oh, I don't like the way that you're comparing things, therefore everything that you're arguing is wrong. I think it's just a distraction because they want to distract the conversation from personal accountability, that what good justification do I have to hurt animals when I clearly don't have to distract the conversation from here to let's talk about why you compared what happens with animals to Holocaust. And I would say that Holocaust existed, the word literally existed before human Holocaust. So animal Holocaust existed way before and after human Holocaust. There is something to consider that even if you morally or physiologically value the amount of pain or suffering that a cow can tolerate or can, experience, as 1,000th or 1,000,000th of a human, which is way underestimation, just because of the numbers by which we kill these animals, you still exceed the amount of suffering that people suffer in anything. We literally kill more animals in 2 years than the number of people existed ever in humanity. That's how many animals we kill. So because of the amount of suffering, I feel like it's almost like underestimate to just compare it to anything else that we've ever done with humans. But I say that for some people, if it's a trigger, I don't say that we should go out of our way to make this comparison. But I also think that it's not unfair to say that if you get rid of your speciesist point of view, speciesism basically means the discrimination against members of other species because of the differences that are not morally relevant. So if you get rid of that, if you can put that away for a second, you see that the same thing that we do with animals, we literally do the same thing to humans and we call it different things. So I think there is also merit to use the right word. And if the right word seems to be something that might be a little harsh, then I'm sorry, maybe the problem is not my comparison, maybe the problem is the system that is so harsh and violent towards animals. But again, in summary, I would say I don't overdo it, but I also don't stay away from it because someone might get upset. Because I got upset when my friends held me accountable, and here I am, I changed. So, I feel like we all have that compassion in deep inside, and it's like you need that spark. You need a little to spark that compassion, and sometimes that comes from getting upset for being held accountable. So I'm not too worried about that.
You talked about the word triggering, so triggering people. So I'm still on the fence. Is it good to trigger people? And what can the normal person do to support animal rights?
I would say we should just do anything in our power and anything that literally in our disposal, any opportunity. So for most people, that would be getting involved in, first of all, just going vegan if you're not. So the first step that we can take is not to be a part of this broken system. The second thing is to, of course, speak up. So if you see a case where an animal is being abused, just talk about violence going on in egg, dairy industries, and meat. If you have to show the footage, don't shy away from that. If you have to talk about it, educate yourself how to defend the, baseless arguments against veganism. What are the common arguments? So be ready, talk to friends, family. Next level is to, of course, joining animal rights organizations. You can pick whichever you like. And lastly, I think it's important enough, given all the other impacts that it has, going back to what I said earlier on, to dedicate our money, our careers, our skills, all of that. So even if your career is already set, you can always do volunteer work for a nonprofit that protects animals. If you don't want to do any of that, you have money, even better, just donate to people who are doing good work. Individuals, nonprofits, whatever. And careers, especially for younger students or younger generation, especially just like myself, I switch careers and fields of studies multiple times because every time I wanted to do more and more and more for the world. So everyone has that power to do the same thing. So choose careers that not only satisfy your passion for what you do, in my case, my passion for science and helping others, but also it's very impactful. And I argue that if you care about the environment, if you care about anything in biomedical sciences, and if you care about animals, your best option would be a career that is relevant to animal advocacy. And no matter if you do computer sciences, mechanical engineering, PR work, whatever you do, there is a way for you to use your talent for this cause.
I also think it's important to show compassion to other people. For example, just making even a comment, yeah, I can understand your view, meat tastes good, but then explain why it's not correct based on the current situation. I found that if you sort of be too direct, then people get defensive and they'll never change their habits because they want to protect what they've built up inside their mind. Would you agree with this?
I 100% agree that we shouldn't be needlessly yelling and be angry and be rude to people, because we have to remember that none of us was born vegan. We all was so ignorant and so there is that mutual understanding that, hey, I'm on your side. We both want animals not to suffer. I used to be a part of the same system. When they try to troll me and say, I love chicken, I said, me too. I love them. That's why I don't eat them. Or when they say, I love meat, I say, I do too. I love the taste of meat, but it's not about taste. It's does taste justify harming animals? So, of course, I think that we shouldn't go out of our way to be rude, but also I feel like there is merit to be straightforward, to say what needs to be said, and not try to pander. So before, I guess I always try to pander and look friendly. And despite the fact that I was inside, I was very angry, because how can you see what's happening to animals and not be angry? If you're not angry, only a psychopath can have no empathy for that. So you have this anger inside, but you are trying to smile and just be friendly. And I felt like people could feel that. And now when I'm not trying to be friendly and not angry, I'm just there for animals. I'm just there to bring awareness. I feel like sometimes people can see that you're being real to them, and they actually appreciate that even more. But like I said earlier, the effectiveness of our outreach is not whether people get upset or not. And I'm not the only example. Many vegans at some point got upset, because we get upset not because of the vegans holding us accountable. It's because we feel uncomfortable. We feel challenged, and nobody wants to be challenged. So it's not more about how vegans do it. You can do it in the nicest way and people will still get upset. So that's more like a reflection of misalignment between our own values and actions, that when somebody points that out, we just get upset. But I agree with you. So there are times that you should protest. But what I also point out to is, think about any leader that you admire, MLK, Gandhi, anyone. None of them was trying to be just happy, goofy guy trying to bring awareness to the cause in the most, in the nicest way that people loved, and, to raise money and donation and just to appeal to masses. And if you really think about it, that's not why you liked them. You liked them because they didn't smile. They believed in the cause so much that they went to prison for it. They protested. They did not give up. They were the voice of the victims. And even at their time, they were not popular, but they won. And the reason that you admire them today is because they did what needed to be done. They said what needed to be said, and no one else was saying or doing. And that's why you like them. And I think our moral responsibility is, first of all, not to be a part of the system, and second, to really speak up against this, mass genocide going on in front of our eyes, and not be so worried about, whether people get upset or what, more like focusing on being the right, voice for voiceless animals. And another reason that it's so important for us to do that is because, I'm gay and I've done a lot of LGBT activism, but I had the means of leaving Iran, in which homosexuality is punishable by death. I can still speak up for myself. I can share my experience. Animals can't. They literally rely on you and me to be their voice. And hence I'm here today.
You talked about there being a time and place to protest. Do you ever bring up these topics when you have people beside you eating meat, dairy or eggs? If you're having lunch and there's someone already with their food eating, do you think it should be a taboo subject, or is it okay to speak about these stuff when they're eating their food?
I guess my question is, if this was happening to an animal that you really cared about, imagine you went out with a friend or colleagues and they all, started eating dogs suddenly and you really cared about dogs. What if it was your pet? Imagine your friends were like, oh, delicious food, we really need a good protein shot and, this is like your dog. Would you sit at that table and eat with them, or just get salads and just like pretend that you're not bothered? Of course you do something, right? If that's an animal that you care about, well, of course, your relationship with that animal is not morally relevant to who's being killed and served, right? So that's a perspective I generally use, that what if this was something that was morally wrong in anything else? What if I was with a group of people who were just making racist comments? So every time I'm with them, they would just catfish or just say racist things. Do I just comfortably hang out with them, or would I try to disconnect or tell them, hey, this is not appropriate, right? So how do we do it with other forms of social justice movement or other forms of injustice? And if you believe that what we do to animals is injustice, then I think we should just be consistent with the way we do that. Now, I don't say that we should yell at everyone, but we should talk about it. We should bring awareness. And I think there is merit in rejecting animal products. And I think that's something that I disagree with Peter Singer, because he believes that, if you're in an environment where, let's say on a plane, where the food is not vegan, then that's the only thing for you to eat, then that's vegan. So that's okay. But I know people who became vegan because they went out with another group and someone refused to eat animal products, and that sparked a conversation. And now they and their entire family is vegan. So there's merit for us not to normalize consumption of animal products, at the very least. And of course, talking about it.
Well, if you know someone and they're eating something with an animal product, is it better to wait for them to finish and then when there's a quiet moment, speak up? Because I personally found that people, they get defensive if they have the meat in front of them, or the eggs or the cheese. A quiet moment when they've already finished eating to then bring up the topic.
Yeah, of course. I think we should think about probably the best time to do that causes the least resistance, I guess. It makes sense.
If someone has a passion for this, working for an NGO, for the listeners here in Europe, do you know any good organizations based in Europe that we could check out?
Well, PETA is active in pretty much a lot of countries, especially Germany. Anonymous for the Voiceless, they are in almost every major city. That's a very good one that really changed the way that I look at animal advocacy and making a lot of connections between human rights and animal rights. These two are definitely good organizations, but if you just look around, you can just find something in your city, and if there isn't, you can start one. But just speak up. Whatever you do, just like any other form of injustice, speak up. The way that we are living here is I always say, it's imagine with what you know about racism, you went back 200 years ago when it was normal and legal. Would you just contribute to it because everyone else is doing, despite the fact that you know it's wrong? Or would you say, I know it's wrong, I'm not going to do it regardless of what other people do, and I'm going to actually speak up and say, hey guys, these are people just like us, I don't know what I would do, but I hope I would be the latter. So let's be that kind of person when it comes to animals today.
Yes, complete paradigm shift and going against the majority. Even during Nazi Germany, there were people that stood up, helped the Jews escape. They gave them shelter. So it's all about doing what you know is right. And if you're not part of an organization, that's okay. You can still make your own initiatives, your own change.
Absolutely. Another good place I want to mention is Vegan Activist. And if you're interested, you can go to veganactivist.com/playground. And no matter where in the world you are, you can donate your skills. So if you're a good programmer, if you're good at website design, research, whatever you're good at, you can offer that to other vegan activists who are looking for volunteers. So that's an excellent opportunity to put your skills in a good work.
Great. Thanks for mentioning that. I'll put that in the show notes. Lastly, you are on Twitter. You're also on YouTube. Is there anywhere else people can find you, or have I covered the main ones?
Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube are the main ones, either for myself or for allied scholars. So it's always at allied scholars. But yeah, either way, and I want to extend my offer for help to anyone who has either questions, any concerns that or anything that really holds them back to either go vegan or become activist. And please let me know if you need any career advice. How can you use your background? Anything I can help with. Yeah, reach out to me and I'm always there.
I'm sure people have a lot to think about and mull over in their minds. So thanks a lot for joining. Despite your hectic schedule, you didn't sleep last night, so get some sleep.
Thank you.
Thanks
I really appreciate having me.
Take care.
My pleasure. Bye. Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot for tuning in. You can support Foolproof Mastery in a number of ways. First of all, please subscribe to our YouTube channel and leave a review on Apple Podcasts with an honest opinion of what you think. Leave plenty of comments on YouTube and share with your friends, family and colleagues if you feel that you have learned something new, in order to keep on getting the knowledge out to as many people as possible. Finally, keep on living every day to the maximum, and see you next time for another episode. Ciao.